Life on David Thorne's farm was a quiet struggle, punctuated by the rhythmic rise and fall of the sun and the persistent whisper of the wind through acres of struggling corn. Every spring, under the vast, indifferent sky, David performed a ritual that baffled his few neighbors, planting rows upon rows of golden sunflowers, not for market, but for a memory. He had no idea that a chance encounter with a passing stranger, someone drawn by the sheer impossible beauty of his field, would transform his quiet grief into a beacon of hope for thousands, sparking a movement that would change his life and the lives of countless others forever. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The skeletal remains of winter still clung to the skeletal branches of the oaks that lined David Thorne's property. The air held a biting chill, a promise of spring yet unfulfilled. David, a man etched by the sun and sorrow, moved across his fields with a stoic determination, his worn hands already stained with the rich, dark soil. He was 50, though the deep lines around his eyes and the permanent slump of his shoulders made him seem older, burdened by years of toil and an unspeakable loss. His farm, nestled in a forgotten pocket of rural America, had seen better days. The old farmhouse, once vibrant with laughter and the aroma of freshly baked bread, now stood quietly, its paint peeling, its porch swing still, a monument to a past that haunted his every waking moment. The corn yield had been poor for the last few seasons, the capricious weather and rising costs squeezing him tighter with each passing year. He was barely holding on, a solitary figure clinging to the land that had been his family's for generations, the land he had once hoped to pass on to children he and Sarah would have raised there. But despite the financial strain, despite the exhaustion that settled deep in his bones, David began his annual ritual. He walked to the farthest corner of his largest field, away from the struggling corn, away from the weary soybean plots. Here, the soil felt different under his boots, softer, more yielding, as if it remembered the joy that had once infused this very spot. This was her field, or rather, the field dedicated solely to her memory. He carried a heavy sack of sunflower seeds, their dry rattle a quiet counterpoint to the rustling wind. Each seed, small and unassuming, held the promise of vibrant life, a burst of defiant color against the somber backdrop of his grief. He began to plant, his movements slow and deliberate, his mind replaying fragments of memories, like old film reels flickering in the dusty corners of his mind. He remembered Sarah, her infectious laugh, her hair like spun gold in the summer sun, her eyes, the color of a clear sky, always alight with an optimistic spark. She had loved sunflowers, not just for their beauty, but for their unwavering pursuit of the sun, their steadfast devotion to light. "They always look for the good, David," she used to say, her fingers gently tracing the rough texture of a stem. "Even when the clouds come, they know the sun is still there, waiting." That unwavering belief in the good, that pursuit of light, was something he desperately missed. Sarah had been the sunshine in his life, the anchor that held him steady against the currents of disappointment and hardship. Her unexpected illness, swift and cruel, had ripped her from him 2 years ago, leaving behind a silence so profound it still echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart. The farmhouse, the fields, even the air he breathed, seemed perpetually infused with her absence. He had planted the first rows of sunflowers the spring after she passed, a desperate act of remembrance, a futile attempt to infuse the land and his soul with some semblance of her joy. The first year, the fragile shoots had pushed through the earth, tentative and hopeful. The second year, they had grown taller, sturdier, a vivid splash of yellow that stood in stark contrast to the faded hues of his sorrow. This year, the third spring without her, the ritual felt more ingrained, a silent conversation with a love that transcended death. He worked until his back ached, and the last of the seeds were nestled in the warming earth. He didn't expect a harvest, not in the traditional sense. These sunflowers weren't for profit. They were for Sarah. A silent, sprawling tribute, a golden sea of hope for a future he wasn't sure he still believed in. As he straightened up, wiping a gloved hand across his brow, he looked out over the barren field, imagining the towering stalks, the vibrant yellow petals, turning their faces towards the sun. It was a private act of devotion, one he never imagined anyone else would understand, let alone notice. His world was small, defined by the boundaries of his land and the quiet solitude of his grief. He had no idea that his simple act of remembrance was about to become a beacon for thousands, igniting a ripple effect that would touch countless lives, including his own. Weeks bled into months, the subtle shifts of spring yielding to the vibrant intensity of early summer. The corn in the main fields, though still struggling, had pushed up tentative green shoots. But it was the sunflower field, Sarah's field, that truly began to flourish. Tiny green sprouts emerged first, tenacious and hopeful, pushing through the dark soil. Then came the steady upward climb, the stalks thickening, reaching, always reaching for the sun. David spent countless hours in that field, not just tending to the emerging plants, but finding a quiet solace among them. He'd walk the rows, his fingers brushing against the rough stems, feeling a connection to Sarah that nowhere else provided. He'd talk to her, whispering updates about the farm, about his day, about the relentless ache in his chest. It was a one-sided conversation, of course, but it brought him a fragile sense of peace. The sunflowers were his silent witnesses, their burgeoning life a testament to a love that persisted even in loss. His neighbors, when they passed, sometimes cast curious glances at the dedicated patch of sunflowers. They were familiar with David's quiet grief, knew he was still reeling from Sarah's death. Most simply offered a sympathetic nod, respecting his private sorrow. A few, like old Mrs. Gable from the adjacent property, would wave, a silent acknowledgement of his unique way of coping. No one asked why. No one understood the depths of his devotion. One sweltering afternoon, the kind of heat that made the very air shimmer above the fields, David was out inspecting the irrigation lines near the edge of his sunflower field. The plants were now waist-high, their broad leaves unfurling, a vibrant green promise of the yellow glory to come. He was engrossed in tightening a leaky valve when he heard a voice. "Excuse me?" David straightened, his back protesting, and turned to see a woman standing at the edge of his property, where a dusty county road met his fence line. She was perhaps in her late 30s, with intelligent, kind eyes, framed by practical spectacles, and a cascade of warm chestnut hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore sensible clothes, a light linen shirt, and khaki pants, and carried a small backpack. She looked out of place, clearly not from around these parts. Travelers rarely ventured down this forgotten stretch of road. "Can I help you?" David asked, his voice rough from disuse and the dry air. He rarely had visitors, save for the occasional feed salesman or the county agricultural agent. The woman smiled, a gentle, empathetic expression that immediately put him at ease. "I apologize for disturbing you. My name is Clara Jensen. I'm just passing through on my way to a conference, and my GPS decided to take me on a rather scenic detour." She gestured vaguely down the winding, unpaved road. "But I couldn't help but notice your field, the sunflowers." Her gaze swept across the verdant rows, a genuine awe in her eyes. "It's truly magnificent. So many of them. What are you growing them for?" David hesitated. His reason for planting the sunflowers was so deeply personal, so entwined with his raw grief, that he rarely articulated it to anyone. It felt like laying bare a part of his soul. But Clara Jensen's eyes held an unusual depth, an empathetic understanding that seemed to invite honesty. He saw no judgment there, only genuine curiosity. He cleared his throat, pushing his dusty cap back. "They're not for anything, really," he began, his voice a little softer than before. "Not for market. They're for my wife." Clara's smile softened further, her gaze becoming even more compassionate. "Oh," she said, simply. Just, "Oh." No platitudes, no pity, just a quiet acknowledgement. She loved sunflowers? David nodded, a bittersweet ache in his chest. "More than anyone I ever knew. Said they always looked for the good, even when the clouds came." He looked out at the field, the vibrant green stretching towards the distant horizon. "She passed 2 years ago, unexpectedly. This is My way of remembering her. A way of keeping her light alive. His voice cracked on the last words, the vulnerability exposed. Clara listened, her posture open, her eyes unwavering. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer facile comforts. She simply absorbed his words, her silence a profound invitation to share more. David found himself talking, a quiet stream of memories flowing freely, unburdening his heart in a way he hadn't in years. He spoke of Sarah's vibrancy, her unwavering optimism, her boundless love for life and for him. He spoke of the emptiness she left behind, the struggle to keep the farm going without her steady hand, her unwavering belief in him. Clara simply nodded, a slow, gentle movement. When he finished, the silence was comfortable, filled with the hum of insects and the rustle of the growing plants. "Thank you for sharing that with me, David," Clara said, her voice soft, infused with a warmth that felt like a gentle embrace. "Your love for her, and the way you honor her, it's truly beautiful. And the sunflowers, they're a perfect testament to the light she brought into the world." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the field once more, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, I work with grief. I'm a grief counselor, and I run a podcast. I share stories of resilience, of love in the face of loss, of how people find ways to navigate the unthinkable." David blinked, surprised. A grief counselor? A podcast? It was a world utterly alien to his solitary existence. He had no idea what a podcast was, let alone the reach it could have. He just saw a kind stranger who had listened, truly listened, to his story. "Your story, David," Clara continued, her eyes alight with a newfound purpose. "It's incredibly powerful. It speaks to the heart of what grief is, and how we find meaning and connection in remembrance. Would you ever consider allowing me to share it? Anonymously, of course, if you prefer. Just the essence of what you've told me today. I truly believe it could touch so many people who are struggling, who feel alone in their sorrow." David looked from her earnest face to his burgeoning field of sunflowers. He had planted them for Sarah, for himself, for their private conversation across the veil of death. But if his quiet act of love, his stubborn hope, could offer solace to others, could somehow extend Sarah's message of looking for the good even when clouds came, then perhaps it was worth sharing. "If you think it would help someone," David said, his voice hesitant, yet imbued with a quiet conviction, "then yes, you can share it." He had no idea the profound ripple effect his simple "yes" would set into motion, unaware that his story, told to a stranger on a dusty country road, was about to blossom into something far grander than even Sarah's. Beloved sunflowers. Clara Jensen, a name that would soon become synonymous with hope and healing for thousands, left David Thorne's farm that sweltering afternoon with a profound sense of purpose. The encounter had been entirely unexpected, a detour both geographical and spiritual, but it had yielded a story so raw, so pure in its expression of love and loss, that she knew it would resonate deeply with her audience. As a grief counselor, she had heard countless narratives of sorrow, but David's quiet devotion, manifested in acres of nascent sunflowers, possessed a unique, almost poetic poignancy. Her podcast, Whispers of Resilience, had steadily grown a dedicated following. Clara had started it initially as a personal project, a way to extend her reach beyond the confines of her private practice. She aimed to create a space where grief wasn't minimized or rushed, but acknowledged in its multifaceted complexity, where stories of enduring love and unexpected hope could be shared. Her soothing voice, empathetic insights, and respectful approach had garnered her a loyal listenership, hungry for authentic narratives. During the drive to her conference, the image of David standing amidst his budding sunflowers, his eyes etched with a love that transcended death, remained vivid in her mind. She meticulously replayed their conversation, not just for the factual details, but for the emotional texture, the pauses, the quiet strength in his voice. She knew she had to honor his vulnerability, to present his story with the same dignity and respect he had shown in sharing it. The conference, usually a stimulating but intense affair, felt almost peripheral to the powerful story simmering within her. She attended the sessions, engaged in discussions, but her mind kept returning to David and his silent tribute. She spent the evenings in her hotel room, not networking, but crafting the episode. She wrote and rewrote, striving for the perfect balance of narrative, introspection, and universal truth. She decided to keep David's identity anonymous, as he had initially suggested, referring to him simply as the Sunflower Farmer. This allowed his story to feel more universal, a relatable testament to human endurance, without being bogged down by specific details that might detract from its core message. She focused on the simple, powerful symbolism, a man's unwavering love, a field of sunflowers turning towards the sun, even in the absence of the one who brought him light. The episode, titled "Finding Light in the Sunflower Field," was released the following week. Clara began with a gentle introduction, setting the scene of her unexpected detour, the vast, quiet farmlands, and then, the sight that had caught her eye, the nascent rows of sunflowers. Her voice, calm and compassionate, wove David's narrative, his wife's love for sunflowers, her philosophy of looking for the good, and his heartbreaking act of remembrance. She spoke of the profound loneliness of grief, the quiet strength required to carry on, and the beautiful, defiant hope embedded in an act as simple as planting a seed. She concluded the episode by reflecting on the power of remembrance, the enduring nature of love, and the often unseen struggles of those who grieve quietly. "Perhaps," she mused, her voice soft, "there are countless David Thornes out there, tending their own silent gardens of sorrow. Perhaps, like the sunflowers, they too are searching for the good, for a way to keep the light alive. And perhaps, sometimes, all it takes is one person to see their light, to ask why, to truly listen." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the episode's release, Clara's inbox was flooded. Listeners from across the globe, touched by the raw honesty and quiet beauty of David's story, poured out their own experiences of grief and loss. Many expressed profound gratitude, finding solace and validation in the narrative. They felt seen, understood, less alone in their own struggles. But beyond the emotional outpouring, something else began to happen. Donations. Small at first, then larger, trickling into Clara's podcast fund. Messages accompanied them. "This man needs help. Keep his farm going for his wife. This story moved me to tears. How can we support him? His wife's spirit should inspire others. Let's make sure her legacy helps." Others. Oh. Clara, accustomed to heartfelt feedback, was stunned by the sheer volume and generosity of the donations. It wasn't just about sharing a story anymore. It was about tangible action, about a community of listeners wanting to make a difference. She realized the profound responsibility she now carried. David Thorne, the quiet farmer, had opened his heart, and in doing so, had unwittingly touched thousands, inspiring them to reach out, to help. She immediately knew what she had to do. The donations were rapidly accumulating, far beyond anything she had anticipated. She couldn't simply keep them. She needed to contact David, to explain what was happening, and to discuss how best to channel this unexpected wave of generosity. The quiet life he had cultivated, a life defined by personal grief and solitary labor, was about to be irrevocably changed by the burgeoning, unstoppable power of collective compassion. The following days were a whirlwind for Clara. The donations continued to pour in, a steady stream of generosity that humbled and energized her. She had established a separate, transparent fund specifically for the Sunflower Farmer Project, outlining her intention to use the money to support his farm and, crucially, to honor his wife's legacy by funding local hospice care, reflecting the "looking for the good" philosophy Sarah had embodied. The transparency resonated with her audience, fueling even more donations. Meanwhile, David Thorne remained blissfully unaware of the seismic shift occurring in the world beyond his quiet farm. He was engrossed in the daily rhythms of his land, tending to the budding sunflowers, battling the persistent weeds in his cornfields, and wrestling with the looming financial anxieties that were a constant shadow over his days. He'd occasionally think of Clara Jensen, the kind stranger who had listened so intently, wondering if his story had truly helped anyone. The idea of a podcast, was still vague to him, a mysterious modern phenomenon that felt a million miles away from the tangible reality of soil and sun. Clara knew she couldn't simply spring this news on him over the phone. Such a profound change deserved a personal touch, a face-to-face conversation. She rearranged her schedule, canceled a few minor engagements, and set out on the long drive back to David's farm, her heart thrumming with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. How would he react to such an unexpected outpouring of public generosity? Would he even believe her? She arrived late in the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the fields. The sunflowers were now noticeably taller, their vibrant green stalks forming distinct rows, a glorious emerald tide stretching towards the horizon. David was in his barn, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal indicating he was working on some piece of stubborn machinery. Clara approached the barn door, the familiar scent of earth and old wood filling her nostrils. "David?" she called out softly, not wanting to startle him. The clanging stopped. A moment later, David emerged, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw her. "Clara? What a surprise! Everything all right?" He looked genuinely puzzled by her return. Clara smiled, a little breathless. "Everything is astonishing, David. Can we talk? Perhaps somewhere a bit quieter?" She gestured towards the old farmhouse, a silent invitation to sit on the porch. They settled onto the creaky porch swing, the late afternoon sun warm on their faces. David waited patiently, his gaze curious, a faint frown line between his brows. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "David," she began, her voice gentle, "do you remember when I asked if I could share your story on my podcast?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, I said if it helps someone, then go ahead." "It helped, David," Clara said, her voice filled with emotion. "More than you can possibly imagine. Your story, your love for Sarah, your sunflowers. It resonated with thousands of people. My episode, Finding Light in the Sunflower Field, it went viral. People were incredibly moved." And David's eyes widened, a flicker of bewildered surprise crossing his face. "Viral? What does that mean? Helped thousands?" "I just told you about Sarah." Clara chuckled softly. "It means your story spread far and wide, touching hearts across the country, even internationally. People connected with your raw honesty, your quiet strength, and beyond just being touched, David, they wanted to help. She paused, then took another deep breath. "Donations, David, they started pouring in, from listeners who wanted to support you, to help you keep the farm going for Sarah. And many of them asked for the funds to also go towards something in Sarah's honor, something that embodied her spirit of looking for the good, even in hardship." David stared at her, utterly speechless. His jaw dropped, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and utter disbelief. He looked from Clara's earnest face to the vast, quiet expanse of his struggling farm. Donations? For him? For Sarah? It was beyond anything he could have conceived. "Donations?" he finally managed, his voice a disbelieving whisper. What are you talking about? How much?" Clara leaned forward, her eyes shining. "David, in just 1 week, we've raised over $50,000. The words hung in the air, a staggering number that seemed utterly impossible in the context of his quiet, struggling life. $50,000. It was more money than he had seen in years, enough to pay off overdue bills, to fix broken equipment, to buy better seeds, to give the farm, and himself, a desperately needed breath. Tears welled in David's eyes, hot and unexpected. He swiped at them awkwardly with the back of his hand, too stunned to speak. The sheer generosity, the unexpected kindness from strangers, was overwhelming. His simple act of love, his private grief, had somehow transformed into a powerful wave of collective compassion. "And it's still coming in," Clara added gently. "People want to help you, David. They want Sarah's memory to live on, to inspire something good. So many have suggested using a portion of the funds to support local hospice care, in her honor. A place where comfort is found in the final days, a place that embodies her spirit of finding light. David could only nod, his throat tight with emotion. The idea of helping others, of extending Sarah's light into the world, was a profound and beautiful concept he hadn't even dared to dream of. He had planted sunflowers for his wife, a private tribute. Unbeknownst to him, those seeds of remembrance had blossomed into a global movement of kindness, sowing hope not just in his own barren fields, but in the hearts of countless strangers. His quiet, solitary life had just been irrevocably, wonderfully, overturned. The staggering figure of $50,000, and the promise of more, hung in the air, a surreal echo of Clara's voice. David sat on his porch swing, reeling, trying to reconcile this unbelievable reality with the quiet, often desperate existence he had known. His eyes drifted over the weathered planks of his farmhouse, the rusty hue of his old tractor, the fields that had been a constant source of worry. $50,000. It felt like a miracle. Hospice, he finally murmured, the word catching in his throat. The idea of supporting hospice care, a place that offered comfort and dignity in the final days, resonated deeply. Sarah's last few weeks had been a blur of doctors and hospitals, but he remembered the compassion of a few nurses who had tried to ease her pain, to offer a glimmer of peace. The thought that Sarah's legacy could now extend to others, bringing them comfort in their darkest hour, filled him with a profound, bittersweet warmth. Clara, sensing his overwhelming emotions, reached out and gently placed a hand on his arm. "It's a lot to take in, I know, David, but it's real. People are truly moved by your story. They want to help. They want to honor Sarah." David looked at her, his eyes still brimming with unshed tears. "Why me, Clara? Why my story?" Clara smiled, her gaze compassionate. "Because it's authentic, David. It's raw. It's a universal truth of love and loss, expressed in a way that's so simple, so powerful. People see themselves in your quiet grief, in your unwavering love. And the sunflowers, they're a symbol of hope. Your story gave people permission to feel their own grief, and then showed them a path forward, a way to find light, even in the darkness." They spent the next few hours talking, discussing the logistics. Clara explained the dedicated fund she had set up, the transparency she had maintained with her listeners. She outlined a plan. A portion of the donations would go directly to the farm, addressing immediate financial needs, repairing equipment, buying better quality seeds for the next season. Another, larger portion, would be dedicated to a newly established Sarah Thorne Memorial Fund, which would work directly with the local hospice. David, still overwhelmed, found himself nodding along, his mind slowly grasping the magnitude of what was happening. It wasn't charity. It felt like a collective embrace, a community rallying around a forgotten farmer and his indelible love. I don't know how to thank you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Or all those people." Clara shook her head. "You don't need to thank us, David. Your story is the gift, and the gratitude flows both ways. Many of my listeners have written to say your story inspired them to act in their own communities, to find ways to honor their own loved ones. You've started something truly remarkable." Before she left, Clara explained that as the donations continued, and the project gained momentum, there might be requests for follow-up interviews, for updates on the sunflowers, on the farm, on the hospice initiative. She reassured him that everything would be handled with sensitivity and respect for his privacy, that he would always have the final say. Over the next few weeks, the impact of the Sunflower Farmer Project became undeniably tangible. The first wave of funds allowed David to pay off overdue bills that had been suffocating him for months. The old, sputtering tractor, a source of endless frustration, was finally repaired, its engine purring with renewed life. He invested in higher quality fertilizer, better seeds for his corn, and desperately needed new parts for his irrigation system. The burden, the constant, gnawing anxiety, began to lift from his shoulders, replaced by a cautious, unfamiliar sense of relief. His physical appearance even began to change. The deep lines around his eyes softened slightly, the permanent slump in his shoulders lessened. He still carried his grief, of course, a quiet companion, but it no longer felt like a suffocating weight. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a faint echo of the optimism Sarah had always possessed. The sunflowers, meanwhile, continued their majestic ascent. They grew taller, their stalks thicker, their leaves a lush, vibrant green. By midsummer, the first buds began to appear, tight green fists holding the promise of golden glory. The field, once a private symbol of remembrance, was slowly transforming into a beacon of hope, not just for David, but for a growing community of strangers, united by his story. The local hospice, a small, underfunded facility in the nearest town, was profoundly grateful for the unexpected support. Clara worked closely with their director, establishing the Sarah Thorne Memorial Fund as a separate entity dedicated to providing comfort, resources, and compassionate care to patients and their families. The news spread through the small town, and the community, long familiar with David's quiet sorrow, began to look at him with a new kind of reverence, understanding now the profound impact of his simple, heartbreaking act of dashin' love. David Thorne, the struggling farmer, was becoming an accidental hero, his grief transformed into a powerful force for good, all stemming from a conversation with a kind stranger who had a platform. As summer deepened, the sunflower field transformed into a breathtaking spectacle. The buds, once tight green fists, unfurled into magnificent golden discs, their faces perpetually turned towards the sun. Acres of vibrant yellow now dominated the landscape, a dazzling contrast to the dusty greens and browns of the struggling cornfields. The air around them hummed with the industrious buzz of bees, a symphony of life and natural abundance. David spent more time than ever in that field, not just out of duty, but out of a profound sense of wonder and gratitude. The sheer beauty of it was overwhelming, the tangible manifestation of Sarah's spirit, of the good she always sought. The burden of financial stress had eased considerably, allowing him to truly appreciate the simple grandeur of his tribute. He would walk the rows, his fingers tracing the velvety petals, and feel a sense of peace he hadn't known since Sarah's passing. It was as if she was there, a golden presence in every bloom, smiling at the unexpected bounty born from his love. Clara, meanwhile, continued to manage the Sunflower Farmer project with meticulous care. Her podcast gained even more traction, the follow-up episodes providing updates on the farm's progress and the growing Sarah Thorne Memorial Fund. Listeners cherished the updates, finding renewed hope and inspiration in David's journey. Many sent him letters, filled with their own stories of loss and gratitude, sharing how his sunflowers had become a personal symbol of resilience for them. David, initially overwhelmed by the sheer volume of mail, found himself deeply moved by the outpouring of shared human experience. He would sit on his porch, reading these heartfelt letters, realizing the profound ripple effect his quiet act of remembrance had created. The local hospice began to directly benefit from the Sarah Thorne Memorial Fund. New, comfortable recliners were purchased for patient rooms, offering a more peaceful last experience. Funds were allocated for art therapy supplies, allowing patients to express their emotions and find moments of creativity amidst their suffering. Most significantly, the fund helped establish a new program, Comfort Calls, where trained volunteers provided phone support to grieving families after their loved ones had passed, extending a hand of compassion during SDM. The lonely aftermath of loss. The hospice director, a compassionate woman named Dr. Lena Petrova, was effusive in her gratitude, inviting David to visit, to see the tangible impact of Sarah's legacy. David, initially hesitant to step outside the familiar confines of his farm, eventually agreed. Clara accompanied him on his first visit to the hospice. Walking through the quiet hallways, seeing the comforting atmosphere, observing the gentle care provided to patients, David felt a profound sense of purpose. He saw the new recliners, the colorful artwork created by patients, the quiet dignity that the fund had helped bring. He imagined Sarah, her spirit shining through, in every act of comfort and compassion. It was a powerful, moving experience that cemented his belief in the project. The story, however, was still unfolding. The media, drawn by the viral nature of Clara's podcast and the heartwarming narrative, began to take notice. Local news channels picked up on the sunflower farmer story, then regional, then national. Reporters descended on David's quiet farm, eager to capture the visual splendor of the sunflowers and the emotional depth of his tale. David, a man who had lived his life largely in solitude, found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. He was initially uncomfortable, camera-shy, unused to public speaking. But Clara was there, a steadying presence, guiding him through interviews, helping him articulate his feelings without overwhelming him. She reminded him that this was for Sarah, for the message of hope, for the hospice. During one particularly high-profile interview with a national news anchor, standing in the heart of his golden field, David spoke haltingly but genuinely about Sarah, about her love for the sunflowers, about looking for the good. He spoke of the unexpected generosity of strangers and the profound impact of the memorial fund on the hospice. His earnestness, his quiet dignity, his obvious love for his late wife resonated deeply with viewers. The images of him standing amidst his glorious, towering sunflowers, a solitary figure dwarfed by the sheer beauty he had created, became iconic. The national exposure triggered a new, even larger wave of donations. The Sarah Thorne Memorial Fund grew exponentially, allowing the hospice to expand its services, to reach more families, to become a true beacon of comfort in the community. David's farm, once struggling on the brink of collapse, was now thriving. He was able to invest in state-of-the-art equipment, implement sustainable farming practices, and even hire a few local hands, providing much-needed jobs in the struggling rural area. The sunflowers became a local landmark, drawing visitors from far and wide who simply wanted to witness the golden expanse, to feel the quiet power of love and remembrance that permeated the field. David would occasionally see cars pulled over on the dusty road, people standing at the fence line, gazing in awe. Sometimes, they would wave, a silent acknowledgement of the story they knew. David Thorne, the grieving farmer, had not sought fame or fortune. He had simply planted seeds in his wife's memory. But through the compassionate platform of a grief counselor, his private act of love had blossomed into a public phenomenon, transforming his own life, enriching his community, and spreading a message of enduring hope and connection far beyond the borders of his quiet farm. Sarah's light, truly, was shining brighter than ever. The peak of summer brought the sunflowers to their fullest glory. The field became a living, breathing testament to enduring love, a vibrant canvas of gold against the azure sky. Tourists, photographers, and curious locals now made regular pilgrimages to David Thorne's farm, drawn by the sheer spectacle and the powerful story behind it. They stood at the fence line, cameras clicking, eyes wide with awe, some even shedding quiet tears, touched by the raw emotion encapsulated in the endless rows of upward-gazing blooms. David, though still fundamentally a man of the earth and quiet solitude, had grown more accustomed to the attention. Clara, his steadfast guide through this unexpected fame, ensured that his privacy was respected, managing interview requests and public appearances with careful consideration. She remained a frequent visitor, her presence a comforting anchor amidst the whirlwind of new demands. Their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship, built on shared purpose and a deep mutual respect. The Sarah Thorne Memorial Fund, powered by the continuous flow of donations, was achieving remarkable things. The local hospice, now a true center of excellence for compassionate care, was able to hire more dedicated staff, offer specialized therapy programs, and expand its reach to neighboring rural communities. They even started planning for a new wing, a dedicated space for family grief counseling, a direct reflection of Sarah's enduring philosophy of looking for the good, even in the face of profound loss. David was intimately involved in these decisions, his voice now carrying weight, his insights from his own journey through grief proving invaluable. His farm, once teetering on the brink, was now a model of sustainable agriculture. The cornfields, finally receiving the care and resources they needed, yielded their best harvest in years. David invested in advanced irrigation systems, soil rejuvenation programs, and even experimented with organic methods, driven by a renewed sense of purpose and a desire to ensure the land continued to thrive, just as Sarah would have wanted. He hired more hands from the local community, injecting much-needed vitality into the rural economy. The quiet desperation that had once shadowed his days was replaced by a vibrant energy, a sense of meaningful contribution. The community, initially surprised by the sudden influx of attention, had embraced the Sunflower Farmer project with pride. Local businesses saw an uptick in visitors, and the small town, once struggling, began to experience a quiet renaissance. Sarah's story, amplified by Clara's platform, had not only saved David's farm, but had breathed new life into the entire region. As summer waned and the golden heads of the sunflowers began to bow, heavy with seeds, David felt a pang of bittersweet melancholy. The beauty was fleeting, the cycle of life and death playing out once more in his fields. But this year, the ending felt different. There was no despair, no overwhelming emptiness. Instead, there was a profound sense of gratitude, a quiet triumph. He walked through the field, the dry rustle of the seed-heavy heads a gentle whisper in the late afternoon breeze. He thought of Sarah, her laugh, her optimistic spirit. He picked one particularly large, perfectly formed sunflower head, its seeds plump and ready. He held it in his hands, feeling its weight, its promise of new life. He decided that from now on, he would collect the seeds from Sarah's sunflowers each year. Not just for replanting, but for distribution. He envisioned giving them away, simple packets of Sarah's hope seeds, encouraging others to plant them, to grow their own symbols of light and remembrance, to find their own good amidst their sorrows. Clara was enthusiastic about the idea, seeing it as a tangible way to extend Sarah's legacy even further, to empower individuals to engage in their own acts of healing. As autumn painted the landscape in hues of red and gold, David began the slow process of harvesting the sunflower seeds. It was a laborious task, but he approached it with a quiet joy. He was no longer just a struggling farmer. He was a custodian of hope, a testament to the transformative power of love and shared humanity. His wife's memory, once a private ache, had become a vibrant, living force, nurturing not just his fields, but the hearts of thousands. And it all began with a few rows of sunflowers, planted by a grieving man, and a kind stranger who had simply asked, why? His journey, from solitary sorrow to a celebrated source of inspiration, was a testament to the extraordinary ripple effect of a simple story, humbly told, authentically heard, and generously embraced. The sunflower, forever turning its face towards the sun, had truly become a symbol of enduring light,